Between the juicy, succulent pork, the bouncy nudes, milky broth, and perfectly cooked eggs, there's a lot to love when it comes to ramen. And this is my attempt to bring a little smidgen of that love to our kitchens. Oh yeah. Starting my research, I was fortunate enough to connect with a legendary figure in the ramen community.
What up, dude? How you doing? Nice to meet you.
Action.
What's going on, dudes? It's Ramen Lord. My name's actually Mike, but I go by the name Ramen Lord on the internet.
Heck
I'm
yeah.
here with Adam.
Heck yeah.
Who's killing it. Killing it on the line, baby.
He's being modest, but Mike Satinover, aka the Ramen Lord, has massively influenced and educated much of the Western world on ramen. He runs an elusive series of pop-ups that he sells tickets to here in Chicago. The events sell out in literally seconds, so when he asked if I wanted to come help him at a pop-up, I jumped on the opportunity to learn from the master. Ramen looks simple, but if you scrape a little dirt off the surface, you're gonna find that the topic is less of a rabbit hole and more of a thriving rabbit metropolis. Alright, knowledge acquired from the Sultan of Slurping himself, let's head back to the kitchen and give this a whack. Before we begin, let's break down the components of ramen. Almost every bowl of ramen has broth, noodles, tare, aka the flavor base, a flavorful oil of sorts, and additional toppings. I won't dance around it. Making ramen from scratch is a lot of work, but it also doesn't have to be done in one sesh. I broke the work up over the course of 4 days because that's what worked for my schedule, but it can totally be done in 2 days if you're an absolute beast. Let's start with the broth. I just soaked pork neck and femur bones overnight to remove some of the blood and other impurities. Just cover the bones with water in a big old pot and bring the whole lot to a medium boil, then spend 20 minutes skimming off the scum from the surface.
Yeah, you don't want that in your soup, trust me.
After a few rounds of gnar removal, once the water stays somewhat clean, remove the bones from the agua, dump the agua, then further clean the bones under running water, making sure to remove any additional glumps of scum. Glump. Yeah, I like that word, glump. That's a new word. We're gonna use that from now on. Once the bones are clean as a baby's booty, reintroduce them to the pot with a load of fresh water. All we gotta do now is pop that on a low burner for 18 hours to extract all that wonderful gelatin.
Now we're gonna make something called the tare, which is basically the flavor base for our ramen. There's a bunch of different kinds of tares. Today we're gonna make a shoyu.
Into a container goes
Some shoyu, mirin, and sake.
followed by dried anchovies, or in Japanese, niboshi. Between those anchovies and this here kombu, aka dried seaweed, we're gonna get a nice punch of umami. Simply mix that all together, pop a lid on it, and let it sit in the fridge overnight. For the aromatic oil, I've chosen a super simple scallion oil. We're just gonna take the whites of the scallion and infuse them into some neutral oil. I'm using grapeseed. Cook this over medium heat, stirring occasionally for 10 to 15 minutes. You'll know when the oil's done when the onions start to brown a little bit and turn kind of crispy and caramelized. You can use these as a ramen topper, or you can just throw them in a vinaigrette or something. No matter what you decide to do, strain them off and pop that oil in the fridge. We're done here. Now, let's kick off day 2 with some chashu pork, aka the fatty, succulent pork that you see in your ramen. Traditionally, chashu is made with pork belly, but it works really good with any sort of like fatty cut, so pork butt, pork shoulder, those are gonna work fine too. This couldn't be any easier. We're just gonna add our sake, water, mirin, and shoyu to a pot with our tied up boneless pork booty, toss in some extra aromatics, which are listed in the recipe below, then bake this thing in a low oven until it's tender. To craft the perfect ramen egg, add fridge-cold eggs to gently boiling water for 7 minutes, then pull them out and shock them in an ice bath for 15 minutes before peeling. For the brine, add equal parts water, mirin, and soy sauce before dropping your eggs and letting them sit for 6 to 8 hours in the fridge. Any more than that and they're going to overcure and get weird. By now, our broth should be reaching its final form, so in the last hour of simmering, drop a whole halved onion and garlic into the broth and bring it up to a ripping boil. We want to do our best to emulsify and infuse the stock at this stage. While that finishes, grab your tare from the fridge and pop it into a small pot. Heat the tare until it's just about to simmer. It should be steaming but not bubbling, then hold it here for about 10 minutes. Remove the kombu, whisk in the brown sugar until it's dissolved, then add in the katsuobushi. Hold that just under a simmer for 10 more minutes, then strain it off and store it in the fridge. There are many types of tare like shio or miso, but today we're making shoyu ramen, so we're using a shoyu tare. Alright, it's been 18 hours, our broth is looking milky and luscious, it's time to strain it off. Remove as many bones and vegetables with a slotted spoon or a spider like this. They're spent, they've done their job. Now get yourself a fine mesh strainer and a container large enough to hold all the broth and give it a strain.
So fine mesh strainers can be kind of a pain in the ass because things get clogged easily. When that happens, just take a label, plunge it in the middle, move up and down, but do not hit the bottom of the strainer. That'll make things drain faster than you think.
Over the course of 18 hours, we transform the collagen in the bones to gelatin, which, along with some emulsified fat, is what gives this broth its rich, milky consistency. Finally, add the broth to a blender and blitz on high for 20 seconds. This is going to finalize the emulsion of flavorful liquid and fat from the bones. This style of cloudy, rich stock is called a paitan soup, while the more clear, consomme-esque types are called chintons. At this stage, an espresso foam-esque layer will develop on top of your broth. That's normal, don't worry. Just cover her up and let it chill in the fridge until you need it. The chashu is finished when you can easily pierce it with a fork like so. Don't do anything at this point, just pop it back in its braising liquid, cover it up, and let it harden in the fridge overnight. Alright, it's noodle time.
Ramen noodles get their distinct chewiness and bounciness from a compound called sodium carbonate. And I know that probably sounds like a spooky, sciencey compound, but really all it is baked baking soda.
You can get this stuff online, it's pretty affordable, but if you want to make your own, just lay some out onto a baking sheet, bake it at 200 degrees Fahrenheit for about an hour, and boom, there you go, sodium carbonate. Whip out your favorite scale from high school and measure out about 2 grams of this stuff. That's really all you need. Then into your water, add your sodium carbonate that you just measured out and kosher salt.
Make sure that's fully dissolved.
This here bowl of white stuff is bread flour, which is slightly higher in protein than all-purpose. The goal here is to evenly hydrate all of this flour using our relatively small amount of salty liquid. To do so efficiently, pour incremental little amounts of water over the flour and take your time weaving it into the flour. The dough should stick together when pressed, but also crumble apart. Transfer the shaggy mass to a Ziploc bag and let it rest for 30 minutes. After 30 minutes, remove some of the air from the bag if there is any, pop it into another large bag, then use your footsies to sort of press it into a nice sheet of dough like so. Shoot for a dough sheet that's roughly maybe a half an inch thick, then let it rest for another 30 minutes. After its catnap, remove the dough from its plastic prison, cut it in half, then dust your work surface with corn or potato starch. Use a rolling pin to flatten the dough from a ½ inch to a ¼ inch. Then feed it through the largest or 0 setting on the pasta maker. I can't lie, at this stage your dough is likely going to look horrible, but don't worry, it's gonna get better. Fold the janky dough sheet in half, then feed it open-ended side first through the number 2 setting on the machine. You can run it through once, you can run it through a couple of times per number, but work from number 2 all the way up to number 5 or 6. That's gonna give you a nice medium thick noodle. Doing this will align the gluten network in your noodle sheet, making for a better eating experience.
All the streaks are going down one way. That's what we want.
At this stage, you might want to slam a little extra starch on the dough sheets to avoid sticking, but go ahead and cut that in half, and now we're ready to slice our noodles. And when I say slice, I mean run it through the spaghetti setting on the pasta machine. I like my noodles pretty long because you can't unslice them, but that's up to you.
Am I beautiful?
Do your best to wrap the noodles up into nice, neat portions, then pop them in a potato-starched container, and then leave them in the fridge overnight before you use them. Okay, finally, the moment of truth is upon us. Let's make some ramen. Before reheating our tonkotsu broth, we're going to want to remove all of that fat that's solidified on top. Save it, roast vegetables with it, make an aromatic oil, your call. Same thing for the chashu. Remove all of that surface fat, then remove it from the container and slice it while it's cold so that it maintains its shape. Go for pieces of even size and thickness just so that everything's kind of uniform in the bowl. Give your chashu some color under the broiler, on the grill, or if you have a torch, use it. This is menma, aka marinated fermented bamboo shoots. You can get these at most Asian markets or just order them online. I totally did not make these. Okay, that's everything. We just did it all from scratch. So once you have your mise en place, it's pretty much all straightforward from here. Into a deep, warm bowl goes our tare, some scallion oil, and of course our broth. I'm just using a strainer to make sure no little bits get in, even though it's already pretty strained. To cook the nudes, drop them in boiling water for 2 minutes, then strain them off and immediately transfer them to the bowl with the broth. Optionally, pull the noodles over themselves to make it look real pretty and nice with some tongs, or, don't, whatever you want. Then it's on with our toppings, some fresh scallions, and boom, you got yourself a bowl of shoyu ramen.
Alright, very stoked to try this. Let's try some broth. Hell yeah. Don't mind if I do. Yum. Some of the chashu pork. Pig butter.
The takeaway here is ramen is delicious, runs very deep, and is actually surprisingly easy to make at home so long as you spread the work out.
Oh yeah.
Try this one out and let me know how it goes.